The human envoy had been working at the Galactic Council for months, but lately something felt off. It started with small things, tiny details that at first seemed like nothing. Meetings that were supposed to be open and transparent were suddenly closed. Messages he had sent to colleagues went unanswered, and files he had access to before were suddenly marked as restricted. At first, he told himself it was probably just bureaucracy, some new rule he didn't understand yet. But the feeling in his gut said otherwise. Every day, he watched how the council operated. There were many species represented there, some towering, some small, some that moved with a grace that humans could only envy. The humans were a small part of it, just one of many voices. But humans had been respected, known for their creativity and resilience. They had made friends, alliances, and had contributed important ideas to the council. Now, those same allies started avoiding eye contact or quietly leaving the room when he approached. The envoy began to notice whispers in corridors, short pauses in conversation, and subtle gestures that clearly excluded him. It wasn't just the allies. Even the technology seemed to act differently. When he tried to access certain data files, they would vanish before he could open them. Screens that used to display important updates now blinked with errors whenever he logged in. At first, he assumed it was a glitch. But glitches don't follow patterns. This was deliberate, and it wasn't happening to anyone else, only to him and the other humans who were part of the council. Delegation. He decided to report what he had noticed to Earth Command. His message was carefully worded, explaining the patterns, the suspicious actions, and the subtle ways humans were being isolated. He asked for advice, for someone to confirm that he wasn't imagining things. The reply came slower than usual, which only added to his unease. While he waited for guidance, the council was moving faster than anyone realized. Behind the closed doors of the main chamber, decisions were being made about Earth decisions that no human had been invited to witness. The envoy knew nothing of the secret vote that was being prepared, a vote that would decide Earth's fate in ways the average citizen couldn't even imagine. He had always believed the council was fair, that negotiation and discussion mattered. But now, he felt that trust slipping away. One day, he noticed a meeting being scheduled that he had not been invited to. It was a small room, tucked away from the main halls, and only a few representatives were listed as attending. When he tried to ask for access, he was politely denied. The explanation was vague. This meeting concerned sensitive matters that are not relevant to Earth's current position. That excuse rang hollow. Everything he had seen pointed in the opposite direction. He started watching more carefully, trying to piece together what was happening. Every decision, every policy change, every delay in communication seemed to point toward one thing. Someone on the council didn't want humans involved anymore. He began taking notes, recording every suspicious activity, every closed door and hushed conversation. It felt like walking through a maze with invisible walls, a place where even small mistakes could be dangerous. Despite the fear, he couldn't stop thinking about Earth. He thought about the colonies, scattered across the solar system, thriving but vulnerable. The council had always been a place for protection, for alliances, for keeping humanity connected to the wider galaxy. If the humans were isolated, what would happen to them? What if these small acts of exclusion were the first step toward something far more serious, something that could put the planet in danger? Then, a breakthrough came. One of the diplomats from another species, someone he had trusted, quietly slipped him a message. It was a simple note, short and urgent, written in the complex script used for secure interstellar communications. The message said, "Be careful. Not everything is as it seems. Watch the votes. The Council plans to act without telling Earth." The envoy felt a chill. The note confirmed his fears. The Council was preparing something behind his back. He didn't know the full extent yet, but he could see the pattern forming. It was not a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bureaucratic error or a simple mistake. This was deliberate, and it was aimed directly at humans. He spent nights awake, thinking about how to respond. Should he confront the council? That had risks. He knew too many stories of envoys who had tried and were quietly removed from their positions, or worse, silenced. But he couldn't do nothing. To stay silent felt like betraying Earth. He began planning carefully, recording observations in encrypted files and making backup copies that could be sent home without anyone noticing. He also noticed the reactions of other council members. Some didn't notice anything unusual. Some were too caught up in their own politics to care. But a few, a quiet minority, were watching him as closely as he was watching the council. They didn't speak openly, but there was a kind of unspoken understanding. Something was coming, and they had to be ready. During one session, the envoy sat quietly as council members debated trade agreements and resource allocations. On the surface, everything seemed normal, polite, and orderly. But he watched the small details. A look exchanged between two counselors, a line in a document that had been changed in secret, a clause that only affected human territories. It was subtle, almost invisible if you didn't know what to look for. But to him, it was a clear sign that Earth's place in the galaxy was being threatened by the end of the day. He realized that this was bigger than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just an attack on him or the human delegates. It was a betrayal of humanity itself. The Council, which had promised fairness and unity, was moving against the very people it was supposed to protect. And he, one human among many species, was now standing in the middle of a plan he barely understood, trying to find a way to warn his people before it was too late. Even as the envoy prepared his next message to Earth Command, he felt the weight of responsibility. Every decision, every action, every word he sent could affect millions of lives. It was a heavy burden, but he understood that someone had to carry it. Humans had survived wars, disasters, and countless challenges on Earth, but now they faced a betrayal unlike anything they had ever known. And he was on the front lines, the first to see it, the first to understand it, and maybe the first to act. The night was long, the council chambers silent after the day's sessions. The envoy stared out at the stars from the observation deck, feeling the vastness of space around him. Each star represented another world, another species, another possibility. And yet, he knew that Earth had been singled out. Somewhere among all those stars, decisions had been made that could change the course of human history forever. He took a deep breath, focusing on one thought. He had to survive, he had to gather evidence, and he had to find a way to bring the truth back home. No matter how the Council tried to hide it, no matter how clever their plan, humanity deserved to know the truth. And he was determined to make sure they did. The envoy didn't yet know what the Council's next move would be, but he knew one thing for certain. The days of quiet diplomacy were over. Something big was coming, and humans had to be ready. He packed his notes, double-checked his secure messages, and prepared for the next day, knowing it could change everything. And in that moment, looking out at the endless galaxy, he felt both fear and hope, the fear of what was to come, and the hope that humanity could rise to meet it. The first part of the story was just beginning. The envoy returned to his quarters, feeling a mixture of unease and determination. The message from the sympathetic diplomat still weighed heavily on his mind. It had confirmed his fears. Something was being planned against humans, and he was running out of time to act. But he couldn't let panic take over. He had to think clearly, observe carefully, and gather as much information as possible. The fate of Earth depended on what he did next. The first clue came in the form of a leaked data packet, slipped into his secure terminal in a way that suggested it had come from someone within the Council itself. The packet was small, almost unassuming, but the information it contained shook him to the core. It revealed the existence of a secret resolution, one that was deliberately kept hidden from human eyes. The resolution was labeled with a code he didn't recognize, something bureaucratic and cold. Directive X-19. As he read through the files, it became painfully clear what the Council intended. Directive X-19 stripped Earth of its rights in all interstellar negotiations. It didn't ban humans from attending meetings entirely, but it removed any real power or influence they might have had. Humans would be allowed to sit in the chambers, hear the discussions, and submit proposals, but no one would ever consider their input seriously. Their voice, once respected and valued, would now be reduced to a mere formality. The envoy felt a chill run down his spine. This was worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just isolation or exclusion. It was deliberate control, a methodical weakening of humanity's position in the galaxy. And the more he dug into the files, the more he realized that this plan wasn't just about silencing humans, it was about containment. The Council viewed humanity as unpredictable, fast-learning, and ambitious. To them, humans were a potential threat that needed to be managed, controlled, and ultimately restrained. That he knew he couldn't confront the Council directly, not yet. If they realized he had the files, he could be removed, silenced, or worse. He had seen hints of this before. Envoys who disappeared without explanation, communications that suddenly stopped, colleagues who were reassigned under mysterious circumstances. The Council was ruthless when it came to protecting its secrets. So he acted carefully. He copied the files, encrypted them, and created multiple backups. Some were sent to secure locations near human colonies, others hidden in systems that even Council members would have difficulty accessing. Every precaution mattered. He understood that even a single mistake could destroy the evidence, and with it, the chance for humanity to respond. While he worked, he observed the Council members more closely than ever. Their behavior, once normal and professional, now seemed calculating. He noticed subtle alliances forming, secret communications that didn't include humans, and decisions being made behind closed doors. Every gesture, every glance, every passing note seemed designed to reinforce the plan against Earth. It was a web of politics, deception, and control, and he was trapped in the center of it. Despite the danger, the envoy refused to be paralyzed by fear. He remembered why he had taken this position in the first place: to represent Earth, to protect human interests, and to ensure that humanity had a voice in the galaxy. That voice could not be silenced, not while he was still capable of speaking. Observing and acting. One night, as he reviewed the leaked documents again, he found an unexpected ally in an unusual form, a neutral observer species. These beings were known for their honesty, their detachment, and their strict rules against political manipulation. One of their representatives approached him quietly, offering confirmation of what he had already discovered. They had noticed the same pattern, the same hidden agenda, and they warned him that the Council was moving quickly. Time was running out. The envoy felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that someone else had confirmed the danger, but anxiety that the clock was ticking. Every day that passed without action increased the risk that Directive X-19 would be fully implemented. Humans could be stripped of their rights, their colonies weakened, and their voice erased from the Council's decisions. The thought of Earth being powerless in the face of such betrayal made his resolve stronger. He began planning his next steps carefully. He had to find a way to alert Earth Command without alerting the Council. He had to gather undeniable proof that could not be dismissed as paranoia or misunderstanding. And most importantly, he had to prepare for the possibility that he might be discovered at any moment. Every move had to be calculated, every action discreet, and every message carefully encrypted. As the days passed, the envoy noticed that the Council was accelerating its efforts. New policies were being passed, It seemed unrelated at first glance: trade regulations, resource allocations, and communication rules. But as he examined them closely, he realized they were all designed to weaken humans specifically. Certain energy supplies were being redirected, some colonies were receiving less support, and communication channels were being slowed. It was a silent, methodical attack, invisible to those who weren't paying attention. He couldn't help but think about the people on Earth, the millions who had no idea what was happening. They trusted the Council to act fairly, to maintain peace, and to protect humanity's place in the galaxy. But the envoy knew that trust was being betrayed, and he was the one who had to act to protect it. During one particularly tense meeting, he overheard a conversation between two council members that confirmed his fears even further. They spoke openly about humans being too fast, too clever, and too independent. One of them remarked that humanity had learned too much, too quickly, and that it was time to put them in their place. The envoy felt a surge of anger and determination. This was not about fairness, diplomacy, or cooperation. This was about control, and it was aimed directly at humans. With the evidence in hand and the confirmation from the neutral observer, the envoy made a decision. He would not confront the Council directly, but he would find a way to transmit the files back to Earth. He would ensure that humanity knew the truth before it was too late. It was a dangerous plan, but he had no choice. The stakes were too high to do nothing. He spent the next several days preparing. He encoded the data into multiple layers of encryption, disguised it as routine communications, and set up redundant channels to ensure it reached Earth safely. He knew the Council monitored every transmission, so every precaution mattered. Each step required patience, precision, and nerves of steel. Even as he worked, he couldn't ignore the personal toll. The stress, the fear, and the constant vigilance weighed heavily on him. Sleep was difficult, meals were often skipped, and every interaction with Council members carried a hidden risk. Yet, despite the fear, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had experienced before. He was not just a diplomat. He was a guardian of Earth's voice, a protector of humanity's rights in a galaxy that was suddenly turning against them. Then came a breakthrough. One of the encrypted messages was successfully transmitted to a secure Earth station. It contained the leaked files, the observations, and a warning. The Council was preparing to strip humans of their rights, and humanity needed to act quickly. The envoy knew that this was only the first step, but it was a critical one. For the first time, Earth Command would see the truth, unfiltered and undeniable. As he watched the message travel across the stars, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The Council had betrayed humans, and the envoy had witnessed it firsthand. But he also realized that this betrayal could be the catalyst for something greater. Humans were resilient, creative, and determined. If they learned the truth, they would not bow to the Council's secret agenda. They would stand united and ready to defend their place in the galaxy. The envoy understood that the coming days would be dangerous and uncertain. Directive X-19 was already in motion, and the Council would not stop easily. But he had taken the first step in exposing the truth. Humanity now had the opportunity to respond, to fight back against the silent betrayal, and to ensure that their voice could never be ignored again. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope amid the fear. The Council might have planned in secret, but humans had something the Council could never control: their determination, their resilience, and their unwillingness to be silenced. And as the envoy prepared for the next phase of his mission, he knew that the story of humanity was far from over. The betrayal had been revealed, but the battle for truth, justice, and survival was only just beginning. After the envoy transmitted the critical files back to Earth, he felt a small sense of relief, but it was fleeting. The Council's actions were already starting to show their effects across human colonies. At first, the changes were subtle, almost imperceptible. Supply shipments were delayed slightly, communication signals were weaker, and technical support from other council members was slower than usual. These small inconveniences seemed innocent to the casual observer, but to the envoy, they painted a clear picture. The council was deliberately weakening humans, step by step. Without openly announcing it, in the major human colonies scattered across the galaxy, people began noticing unusual problems. Energy supplies were inconsistent. Some colonies experienced rolling blackouts, while others had unexpected shortages of vital resources. Transportation between planets became more restricted, with delays that made essential goods and communications take days longer than they should. At first, administrators assumed these were accidents or routine system failures. But when the envoy's transmitted evidence arrived, it became impossible to ignore the truth. These problems were not accidental. They were part of a larger, deliberate plan. Earth Command convened an emergency meeting. Leaders, scientists, and diplomats gathered in secure chambers, their faces tense with concern. They reviewed the envoy's files, reading transcripts of council discussions, hidden resolutions, and secret communications between council members. The documents were undeniable. The council intended to isolate humans, stripping them of influence and weakening their colonies. For the first time in decades, humanity realized that diplomacy alone would not protect them. Their allies had either been silenced, deceived, or were too afraid to oppose the council openly. As they reviewed the evidence, the humans also realized the scale of the betrayal. It was not limited to one colony or one planet. It affected the entire human network across the galaxy. Every decision, every policy, every small act of interference was part of a deliberate effort to make humans dependent, powerless, and easily controlled. The council no longer saw humans as partners. They saw them as a threat that needed to be contained. Meanwhile, the envoy continued his work at the council. He moved carefully, aware that every step could be observed. He watched as council members implemented new regulations designed to slow human progress. New energy restrictions were applied selectively, communication systems were slowed, and trade agreements were rewritten in ways that disadvantaged humans. Even routine diplomatic meetings were manipulated. Humans were often left out of important discussions, and their proposals were ignored or delayed indefinitely. It was a silent, methodical strangling of human influence. One step at a time, the envoy also noticed another troubling development. Some neutral species, who had been reliable allies in the past, began distancing themselves. They had witnessed the council's actions and, fearing reprisal, chose to avoid open support for humans. This left the envoy feeling isolated and burdened with responsibility. Humanity's fate rested on his shoulders, and he could not rely on the usual network of diplomatic support. Despite the challenges, the envoy refused to give up. He continued documenting every suspicious act, every policy change, every delayed communication, and every indirect attack on human colonies. He compiled the data carefully, creating encrypted files that could be sent to Earth without alerting the council. Each piece of information was a puzzle piece, building a complete picture of the council's strategy. He knew that the more evidence he gathered, the stronger humanity's response could be. One evening, as he observed the council from the observation deck, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of council members was openly discussing the potential outcomes of isolating humans. They spoke in technical terms, as if humans were a problem to be managed, rather than a species with intelligence, creativity, and the right to exist freely. One of them remarked that humans were learning too fast, and that if they were not contained, they could challenge the council's authority. Another suggested methods to slow human growth and technological development subtly, so that no one would notice until it was too late. Hearing this, the envoy felt a mix of anger and urgency. This was not diplomacy. It was manipulation, control, and betrayal at the highest level. Humans had contributed to the Council, built alliances, and followed the rules. Yet the Council was planning to weaken them systematically. The envoy understood that if humans did not act soon, their colonies could be crippled, their influence erased, and their progress stalled for generations. Back on Earth, the transmitted files triggered immediate action. Scientists, engineers, and strategists examined the data, analyzing the ways in which the Council had targeted human colonies. They began to develop contingency plans to counteract the energy restrictions, slow communications, and trade delays. Earth Command coordinated with unaffected colonies, creating alternative supply chains and communication networks. Even with limited resources, humans started finding ways to bypass the Council's attempts to weaken them. The envoy also realized the importance of diplomacy, but in a new form. Open negotiations with the Council were no longer possible, not until humanity could secure evidence and demonstrate its strength. Instead, he focused on alliances that could be rebuilt quietly, with species who were sympathetic or who valued fairness over fear. These new alliances were delicate, requiring trust, patience, and careful communication, but they were essential to countering the Council's plans. As the weeks passed, the impact of the Council's actions became more visible. Some colonies experienced temporary shortages of food and medicine. Communication delays caused confusion in coordinating defense and resource management. Human scientists had to improvise solutions with limited materials. Yet, in every challenge, humans displayed resilience. Engineers developed makeshift energy systems to compensate for shortages. Colonies used creative communication methods to bypass delays. And leaders, guided by the envoy's intelligence, coordinated efforts to maintain stability and morale. Despite the pressure, the envoy remained vigilant. Every meeting, every interaction, every policy change was carefully noted. He knew that the Council might escalate its actions if they suspected that humans were organizing. And he understood that exposure of the Council's plans could provoke retaliation. So every step had to be measured, every decision deliberate. One day, the envoy received a message from a sympathetic Council member he had met months earlier. The message confirmed that the Council was indeed planning further measures to limit human influence. It suggested that Earth prepare for rapid changes and potential sanctions against colonies. The envoy realized that the betrayal was far from over. The Council was determined to execute its plan fully. But at the same time, the message gave him hope. At least one member of the Council recognized the injustice and was willing to provide guidance, even in secret. With renewed determination, the envoy began coordinating more closely with Earth Command. He sent additional encrypted files, detailed analyses of policy changes, and strategic recommendations for countering the Council's moves. Every transmission was a lifeline, connecting humans across vast distances, keeping colonies informed, and ensuring that the Council could not isolate them completely. As the envoy watched the galaxy from his observation deck, he reflected on the situation. The Council had betrayed humans, yes, but humans were responding. They were adapting, finding solutions, and building networks of support. The initial shock of the betrayal had turned into a focused determination to survive and thrive. Despite the Council's attempts to weaken them, the envoy also thought about the psychological impact of the Council's actions. Humans were being treated as outsiders, manipulated, and restricted, yet they refused to be passive. Colonies maintained morale, scientists worked tirelessly to solve problems, and leaders made difficult decisions with courage. The envoy realized that resilience, creativity, and unity were humanity's greatest strengths. The Council could delay progress, but it could not extinguish the human spirit. At the same time, the envoy knew that the situation could become even more dangerous. The Council might escalate its efforts, targeting specific colonies more aggressively, imposing harsher restrictions, or even attempting direct interference. Every day required vigilance, careful planning, and strategic thinking. Humanity's survival depended on anticipating the Council's next moves and staying one step ahead. As Part 3 of this story unfolded, it became clear that the betrayal was more than just political maneuvering. It was a test of humanity's resilience, intelligence, and determination. The envoy had witnessed the silent sabotage firsthand, and now humans had the evidence, the motivation, and the leadership needed to respond. They were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in a battle for survival and autonomy. Despite the challenges, hope persisted. Humans were learning quickly how to adapt, how to cooperate across colonies, and how to respond to covert threats. The envoy understood that while the Council had power and resources, humans had ingenuity, courage, and the will to survive. And sometimes, those qualities were more powerful than any formal authority or technological advantage. By the end of this phase, Earth Command had established a new contingency network. The envoy's heart raced as he prepared to take the next step. The leaked files, encrypted messages, and careful observations had reached Earth. But he knew that simply sending evidence was not enough. Humans needed proof they could trust, something undeniable that showed the Council's betrayal in full detail. He couldn't rely on rumors, half-truths, or assumptions. The truth had to be clear, and it had to be impossible for anyone to dismiss. In the quiet of his quarters, the envoy began the painstaking work of organizing the evidence. Every meeting, every secret vote, every manipulation of resources or communications was recorded meticulously. He cross-referenced the leaked documents with Council schedules and encrypted logs to create a full timeline of events. Each detail was carefully labeled, each connection clearly explained. The goal was to create a report that could withstand scrutiny, something that no one could deny, even the most skeptical human officials. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. He was no longer just observing. He was the bridge between two worlds, carrying the truth across light years of space. Every decision, every careful step was crucial. If he made a mistake, the evidence could be lost, the Council could retaliate, and humanity could be left vulnerable. Yet, despite the pressure, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. This was his mission, his duty, and he would see it through no matter the risk. Finally, after days of work, he prepared the final transmission. It was a massive package, containing all the encrypted files, a detailed timeline of the Council's actions, and a written summary of the covert strategies they had employed. But he knew that even with all this evidence, humans needed more than documents. They needed witness accounts, voices that could speak to the events directly. The envoy realized that he had to record his own observations. Testimony from someone who had seen the betrayal firsthand, he began to record a series of personal logs, speaking clearly and calmly, describing everything he had seen. He explained how meetings had been closed to human delegates, how resources had been redirected to disadvantaged human colonies, and how communication delays were deliberately implemented. He described the secret votes, the cold language used by Council members to discuss humans, and the subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. Every detail was included, every observation carefully articulated. He spoke not as a diplomat, but as a human witnessing injustice, hoping to awaken humanity to the truth. Once the recordings were complete, he added them to the transmission. Then he created multiple secure channels to send the data back to Earth. Some transmissions went directly to Earth Command. Others were routed through human colonies, and a few were hidden in neutral interstellar networks. He knew the Council monitored communications closely, so he used every precaution to disguise the data. Every step had to be foolproof. There was no room for error. When the first transmissions reached Earth, the impact was immediate. Leaders, scientists, and strategists gathered in emergency sessions to review the envoy's recordings. As they listened, Faces turned from disbelief to shock, and finally to grim determination. The evidence was clear. The Council had betrayed humans, and the threat was real. It was no longer speculation or suspicion. It was fact, undeniable and direct. The recordings sparked discussions across Earth Command. Leaders debated how to respond, weighing diplomacy against defense. Some argued that the Council might be convinced to reverse its actions if humans approached carefully. Others warned that the Council's plan was deliberate and would not change without a show of strength. The envoy's evidence left no room for doubt. Humans had been deliberately weakened, isolated, and manipulated, and time was running out. At the same time, the envoy continued observing the Council. He noticed that some members were beginning to realize that their plan might be exposed. There were subtle changes in behavior, whispers that had previously gone unnoticed, cautious glances, and increased security around sensitive files. The envoy understood that the Council was aware of a leak, even if they didn't know its full extent. This made the task more dangerous, but it also confirmed that exposing the betrayal was the right move. The envoy also reached out discreetly to allies within the Council. Some species, who valued fairness and transparency, quietly offered support. They provided additional data, confirmed timelines, and even suggested ways to protect the envoy from potential retaliation. These quiet alliances were fragile, but they were crucial. They gave humanity a small but vital network of support within the very institution that had betrayed them. Meanwhile, on Earth, the envoy's transmissions were analyzed in every possible way. Scientists developed new communication protocols to bypass Council monitoring. Colonies adjusted supply chains to compensate for delayed resources. Strategists planned emergency responses in case the Council attempted direct interference. For the first time, humans were acting not just to survive, but to regain control over their own destiny. The envoy realized that his role was evolving. He was no longer just a witness. He was an active participant in humanity's defense. He began sending strategic recommendations along with evidence, guiding colonies on how to maintain independence despite the Council's restrictions. He advised on resource allocation, communication methods, and contingency planning. Every suggestion was designed to minimize risk while maximizing humanity's ability to respond. As he worked, he reflected on the nature of the Council's betrayal. It was systematic, deliberate, and carefully concealed. The Council had underestimated humans, assuming that subtle manipulation and exclusion would be enough to control them. But humans were not passive. They were resilient, creative, and capable of rapid adaptation. The envoy's transmissions were awakening humanity to the reality of the threat. And with knowledge came power, the power to act, to resist, and to reclaim what had been stolen. The recordings also had an unexpected effect on human morale. Colonies that had been struggling with shortages and delays now understood that the problems were not random accidents. They realized that they were being targeted deliberately, and this knowledge sparked determination rather than fear. Communities organized themselves, scientists shared solutions across colonies, and leaders coordinated more closely than ever before. Humans were no longer isolated victims. They were an interconnected network, ready to respond to the Council's moves. Even the envoy felt a renewed sense of hope. Each transmission, each piece of evidence, and each successful communication back to Earth strengthened the connection between humanity and its colonies. The Council's attempts at isolation were being countered not with force, but with ingenuity, coordination, and courage. Humans were proving that knowledge and unity could overcome even the most calculated betrayal, yet the envoy remained cautious. He knew the Council would escalate its actions if they suspected the leak had been discovered. Policies could become harsher, resources could be cut more severely, and communication could be blocked entirely. Every day required vigilance, careful observation, and precise action. The envoy understood that exposure was only the first step. Humanity still needed to prepare for what came next. In the meantime, he continued documenting everything. Every subtle manipulation, every whispered conversation, every hidden vote was recorded and added to the growing archive of evidence. He knew that the more information humanity had, the stronger their response could be. It was a race against time, a delicate balance between gathering evidence and avoiding detection. And the envoy was at the center of it all. As the days turned into weeks, the impact of the envoy's actions became increasingly clear. Earth Command had full access to the evidence. Colonies were adapting to counter the Council's restrictions, and humans were beginning to act with coordinated purpose. The betrayal had been exposed, but humanity was not defeated. Instead, the exposure had sparked a movement, a determination to reclaim their rights, protect their colonies, and ensure that no one could silence them again. The envoy watched from his post, knowing that the next phase would be critical. The Council had been exposed, and their plans were now public to those who needed to know. Humans had evidence, strategy, and coordination on their side. The stage was set for a confrontation that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. He took a deep breath and looked out at the stars, reflecting on what had been achieved so far. The Council's betrayal had been revealed, and humans were awake to the danger. Colonies were connected, Earth was informed, and the envoy had done everything possible to ensure that truth reached those who needed it. Yet he knew that the journey was far from over. The Council would not give up easily, and humans would face further challenges as they worked to reclaim their voice and influence. But the first step had been taken, and it was a significant one. Humanity now had knowledge, evidence, and the beginnings of a strategy that could withstand the Council's attempts to control them. As he prepared for the next day, the envoy felt a mix of resolve and hope. The betrayal had been exposed, and humanity had responded with courage and ingenuity. The coming days would test them further, but for the first time, humans were no longer in the dark. They knew the truth, and with that knowledge came power, the power to act, resist, and reclaim their rightful place in. Earth had received the envoy's transmissions, the evidence of betrayal, and the detailed logs of the Council's secret actions. Now the question was what to do next. Humanity could no longer remain passive. Waiting, hoping the Council would change its mind, was not an option. The time for diplomacy alone had passed. It was clear that the Council did not intend to reverse its plans quietly, and humans had to respond with clarity, unity, and strategy. The first step was to activate Order iHFY, a rarely mentioned emergency directive that had been drafted long ago for situations just like this. The directive was designed to unify human colonies, coordinate defensive and strategic actions, and send a clear message across the galaxy. Earth would no longer be silenced. Unlike ordinary military measures, Order iHFY combined diplomacy, defense, and communication into a single, coordinated response. It was the ultimate fail-safe plan, reserved for moments when survival and autonomy were at stake. Once the order was activated, Earth Command began mobilizing every resource available. Scientists worked day and night to create secure communication networks that could bypass Council monitoring. Engineers developed alternative energy grids to counteract the deliberate restrictions imposed by the Council. Logistics teams rerouted supply chains to ensure that colonies had access to essential resources. Every action was deliberate, precise, and carefully coordinated to maximize impact while minimizing risk. The envoy, at his post within the Council, continued to act as a vital bridge. He transmitted updates on Council movements, secret discussions, and new policy implementations back to Earth. Every piece of information allowed humans to anticipate the Council's next steps. Colonies could adjust energy allocations, prepare for communication delays, or respond to trade restrictions before they became crises. The envoy's vigilance became a lifeline for Earth's leadership. At the same time, Earth began a bold diplomatic strategy. Using the evidence and recordings provided by the envoy, human representatives sent messages to other species in the galaxy. They explained the Council's betrayal, the covert attempts to isolate humans, and the deliberate weakening of human colonies. These communications were carefully framed, emphasizing the facts and the need for fairness and transparency. Humanity was no longer just defending itself. It was exposing injustice across the galaxy. The effect was immediate and surprising. Many species, previously silent or neutral, began to question the Council's actions. Some openly expressed concern, while others offered discreet support to human colonies. A few minor coalitions, previously hesitant to act, started sharing intelligence and resources with humans. The balance of power was shifting, subtly but significantly. Humanity's coordinated response, combined with transparency and truth, was giving them influence far beyond what the Council had anticipated. Meanwhile, the Council reacted with growing tension. Some members called for stricter enforcement of Directive X-19, attempting to tighten restrictions and regain control. Others argued privately about the potential consequences of the exposure. The envoy observed these debates carefully, noting every fracture, hesitation, and disagreement. The Council was no longer monolithic. The exposure had sown doubt and unease among its members. Humanity could exploit this uncertainty, but only if they remained coordinated and strategic. As Order iHFY rolled out, colonies began sharing resources more efficiently. Food, energy, and medical supplies were prioritized based on need, ensuring no settlement would suffer unnecessarily from Council interference. Communication systems, once slowed or monitored, were strengthened with secure relays and encryption. Scientific data, previously restricted by Council regulations, was distributed freely among human research teams, accelerating innovation and problem-solving. Every colony became part of a connected network, resilient against isolation and sabotage. In addition to logistics and resources, Earth initiated a public awareness campaign for humans in all colonies. People were informed of the betrayal in a controlled, clear manner so panic would not take hold. Leaders emphasized resilience, problem-solving, and unity, reinforcing the message that humans were capable of overcoming even the most calculated challenges. The morale boost was significant. Colonies that might have felt helpless now knew they were part of a larger, coordinated effort. Strategically, humans also prepared defensive measures. While the envoy confirmed the Council had not yet resorted to military force, humans could not take chances. Advanced defense systems were activated in key colonies. Patrols and monitoring protocols were increased to detect sabotage or interference. Scientists developed contingency technologies to ensure essential functions could continue even under restrictive conditions. Everything was designed to maintain autonomy and security, while avoiding unnecessary escalation. The envoy played a crucial role in these preparations. He provided real-time insights into Council behavior, identifying potential weak points and opportunities for intervention. He noted which members were most resistant to human influence, which policies were likely to be delayed, and which allies could be discreetly approached for support. His actions allowed Earth Command to make informed decisions, ensuring that resources and efforts were deployed where they would be most effective. Communication became another critical front. Humans broadcast their side of the story across the galaxy, explaining the Council's betrayal and outlining their response. These messages were factual, evidence-based, and persuasive. They emphasized humanity's commitment to fairness, transparency, and cooperation, contrasting with the Council's secretive and manipulative actions. The broadcasts had multiple effects. They rallied neutral species to support humans, encouraged those within the Council to question their leaders, and strengthened the sense of unity and purpose among human colonies. Even within the council, tension grew. Some members began questioning whether Directive X-19 was worth pursuing, given the growing resistance and exposure. Small factions formed, advocating for negotiation rather than further suppression. These internal conflicts created opportunities for humans to advance their position without direct confrontation. The envoy carefully monitored these dynamics, providing Earth with insights that could be leveraged to influence outcomes subtly. Meanwhile, human scientists and engineers continued innovating. With council restrictions partially bypassed, they accelerated research and development, improving energy efficiency, communication technology, and defensive systems. Knowledge was shared openly among colonies, ensuring that no one was left behind. Each breakthrough, no matter how small, strengthened humanity's position and demonstrated resilience in the face of betrayal. The human leadership also focused on long-term strategy. They considered potential scenarios, from continued council interference to direct confrontations. Contingency plans were created for worst-case situations, including temporary isolation of colonies or more severe restrictions. Yet these plans were balanced with proactive measures, diplomatic outreach, coalition building, and evidence dissemination to ensure that humans remained capable of defending themselves without unnecessary escalation. One of the most significant aspects of Order iHFY was the psychological impact. Humans, previously isolated and manipulated, now felt empowered. Colonies coordinated like never before, sharing resources, intelligence, and strategies. Leaders communicated regularly, fostering trust and collaboration across vast distances. The sense of unity, purpose, and resilience became a force in itself. Humans were no longer passive victims, but active participants shaping their destiny. The envoy observed these developments with a mixture of pride and cautious optimism. He had seen the council's betrayal firsthand, and he had risked his position to ensure that humanity knew the truth. Now, seeing colonies adapting, Earth coordinating, and species across the galaxy responding, he felt that his efforts were making a tangible difference. The council had underestimated humans, and that underestimation was now humanity's advantage. At the same time, the envoy remained aware of the risks. The council could escalate, attempting direct interference or harsher restrictions. Some colonies remained vulnerable, dependent on fragile systems or limited resources. Every step forward required careful planning, coordination, and vigilance. But humanity's response demonstrated that even in the face of betrayal, they could act decisively, strategically, and united. As the days passed, the effects of Order iHFY became increasingly clear. Colonies were more resilient, communications were secure, and resources were managed efficiently. Diplomatic outreach had gained allies, even within the council itself. Humans had exposed the betrayal, protected their colonies, and begun to reclaim influence in the galaxy. The envoy knew that the next phase would involve consolidating these gains, ensuring that the council could no longer manipulate or isolate humans. Through all this, humans proved something essential. Betrayal could not break them, and manipulation could not silence them. By combining intelligence, coordination, and resilience, they had turned a dire situation into an opportunity. Order iHFY was more than a directive, it was a statement of purpose. A declaration that humanity would survive, adapt, and thrive. Even when faced with deception at the highest level, the envoy looked out at the stars, reflecting on the progress so far. The council. The envoy felt a mix of tension and determination as the final phase of humanity's response began. The council had been exposed, Earth had activated Order iHFY, and human colonies were now operating as a coordinated network. But the envoy knew the council would not surrender quietly. Their attempts to manipulate, restrict, and control humans had failed, and now they would respond in a way that could be aggressive, subtle, or even unpredictable. Every step needed careful planning. Earth Command continued to coordinate all colonies with precision. Supply chains were fully rerouted, secure energy grids were operational, and communication networks were fully encrypted. Scientific teams had developed contingency technologies to compensate for potential disruptions. Every human settlement was prepared for sudden interference, ensuring that even the most remote colonies could remain functional. It was a massive effort, a testament to humanity's ingenuity and coordination. At the same time, the envoy monitored the council closely. He observed shifts in behavior, debates behind closed doors, and subtle movements of key members. The council was no longer united. Factions had formed. Some members advocated negotiation, fearing that the exposure of Directive X-19 could damage their reputation permanently. Others pushed for aggressive measures, hoping to regain control over humans before the damage became irreversible. The envoy understood that this division could be humanity's advantage, but only if humans acted wisely and strategically. The first signs of the Council's response came in subtle ways. Certain policies were temporarily delayed, giving the impression of normalcy, but the envoy recognized these as maneuvers to test human reactions. Communication channels were intermittently disrupted, but backup systems held. Supply routes were slightly altered, but colonies had prepared for these changes. The Council was probing, trying to identify weaknesses, and the envoy provided Earth Command with real-time insights into these subtle tactics. Meanwhile, Earth Command coordinated a multi-layered diplomatic campaign. Using the envoy's evidence and recordings, humans appealed to neutral species, highlighting the Council's manipulation and unfair treatment. They emphasized the importance of fairness, transparency, and cooperation, demonstrating that humanity was willing to negotiate but would not be silenced. The campaign had a significant impact. Several species previously hesitant to act began providing discreet support, offering resources, intelligence, and safe channels for communication. The envoy also focused on preparing colonies for any potential escalation. Advanced defense systems were activated in key strategic locations. Patrols monitored for sabotage or interference. Scientists developed rapid response technologies to ensure essential functions could continue even under extreme conditions. Every precaution was designed to maintain independence while minimizing unnecessary conflict. Despite the tension, humans demonstrated remarkable resilience. Colonies adapted to sudden changes, communications remained secure, and resource allocation continued efficiently. Scientists and engineers collaborated across light years, sharing innovations and solutions. Leaders coordinated decisions with precision, ensuring that humanity's response remained unified and effective. Every challenge was met with ingenuity, determination, and calm. The Council, frustrated by humans' preparedness and adaptability, began to reconsider its approach. Some members advocated for negotiation, realizing that further aggressive measures could backfire and strengthen humanity's alliances. Others remained determined to reassert control, but their influence was weakened by the evidence, the exposure, and the shifting opinions of neutral species. The envoy watched these dynamics carefully, providing Earth with intelligence that could be used to influence outcomes without direct confrontation. Earth Command decided to take a decisive but measured step. They sent an official communication directly to the Council, outlining humanity's awareness of Directive X-19, detailing the exposure of the betrayal, and emphasizing humans' preparedness and resilience. The message was firm but professional, leaving no doubt that humans would defend their rights, maintain autonomy, and collaborate with allies. But without seeking unnecessary conflict, the envoy observed the Council's reaction closely. Tension was evident in every chamber. Council members debated the message's implications, some openly acknowledging the strength and preparedness of humans, while others argued about the risks of escalation. The divisions grew more pronounced, and it became clear that humanity had shifted the balance. The Council's authority over humans was no longer absolute. Meanwhile, humans consolidated their gains. Colonies strengthened communication networks, secured resources, and implemented defensive protocols. Diplomacy continued with neutral species, expanding alliances and building trust. Scientists and engineers refined technologies to ensure resilience against future interference. The envoy monitored these actions, ensuring that coordination remained seamless and that any council response could be anticipated. One day, a significant breakthrough occurred. A faction within the council, previously silent, openly advocated for negotiation with humans. They recognized that continued aggression could lead to broader conflict and damage the council's credibility across the galaxy. Their support for dialogue created an opportunity for humanity to assert its position, propose fair agreements, and reclaim influence without engaging in destructive confrontation. The envoy carefully transmitted these developments to Earth Command, highlighting the importance of timing, diplomacy, and strategic messaging. Leaders reviewed the information and prepared a proposal for negotiations. It emphasized fairness, mutual respect, and the value of cooperation, while also asserting humanity's right to autonomy and protection from covert manipulation. The proposal was designed to appeal to both rational and ethical considerations within the Council. As the negotiations began, the envoy observed the dynamics closely. Some council members resisted, but the growing support from neutral species, combined with humanity's preparedness, created a powerful leverage. Humans demonstrated that they were no longer passive participants. They were active, informed, and resilient. The envoy's role remained critical, providing real-time intelligence and ensuring that humans maintained both caution and strength. Over time, the Council began to accept the necessity of compromise. They acknowledged that humans had been unfairly targeted, and while some policies required adjustment, the broader manipulation was formally rescinded. Human colonies regained full access to resources, trade, and communication networks. The threat of isolation or covert restriction was lifted. Directive X-19 was officially nullified, and humanity's voice in the Council was restored. Despite the resolution, humans did not celebrate blindly. Earth Command emphasized vigilance, resilience, and preparedness for future challenges. Lessons were learned about transparency, communication, and the importance of monitoring even trusted institutions. Colonies maintained enhanced networks, and diplomatic relationships were strengthened. Humanity had survived betrayal and had emerged stronger, more coordinated, and more aware of its position in the galaxy. The envoy, reflecting on the journey, felt a mix of relief and pride. From the initial discovery of the Council's covert actions to the careful documentation, the transmission of evidence, and the coordination of order iHFY, every step had been crucial. Humans had faced manipulation, isolation, and potential defeat, but they had responded with strategy, resilience, and unity. Looking out at the stars, the envoy understood the broader significance. Humanity's experience was not just about survival. It was a testament to determination, intelligence, and collaboration. Even when confronted with betrayal at the highest level, humans had adapted, learned, and taken control of their destiny. They had transformed fear and uncertainty into action, building a stronger, more resilient civilization. Colonies continued to thrive. Communication networks remained secure, and alliances expanded. Humanity had proven that knowledge, coordination, and determination could overcome even calculated manipulation. The Council's betrayal had been a challenge, but it had also revealed human strength, ingenuity, and courage in the face of adversity. The envoy's role, once that of a simple observer, had become pivotal. By documenting the betrayal, transmitting evidence, and providing intelligence, he had enabled humans to respond strategically and effectively. Humanity had not only survived the Council's deception, but had emerged stronger, more united, and more capable of defending its place in the galaxy. As Part 6 concluded, the galaxy had changed. Humans had reclaimed their autonomy, restored their influence, and strengthened their networks. The Council had been exposed, its authority challenged, and its actions corrected. Humanity had demonstrated that betrayal, manipulation, and attempts at control could not extinguish resilience. Intelligence, or the human spirit, the envoy, standing on the observation deck, watched the galaxy with a sense of calm determination. Humans had faced one of the greatest challenges in their history, and they had risen to the occasion. The journey had tested courage, strategy, and unity, but it had also revealed the limitless potential of humans to overcome obstacles, adapt to adversity, and secure their future. The story of humanity, once threatened by covert manipulation, had reached a turning point. The Council's bet,